So I've decided on a different strategy to get a joke each time, which is I will ask people to prepare a joke ahead of time. And so I so someone volunteered today, but be open that I might ask you, hey, next time, could you have a joke ready? Anyway, lay it on us.
Thank you. Testing. Oh, works. In the spirit of the festive season, I got a Christmas joke for you.
Excellent. I'm feeling kind of Christmassy because, Thanksgiving's only like 2 weeks away. Yes?
Why did Santa Claus come down the chimney?
Why does he come down the chimney?
Because he came through the back door once and now he pays for child support.
Okay. No. And plus it ties in with the discussion we had about child support and all that. Mrs. Claus was furious, of course, but so I wanted to go back to this graph and I want to have some more discussions about it. So we talked last time about, and I asked you, why was there this big jump from the 1950s to the 1960s in the number of children per woman? And someone pointed out it was the post-war era. This is for the United States after World War II. Soldiers came back home and it was a time of great optimism. You can only, even I can only know about it from historical depictions where, finally America was in a good war, right? Unlike World War I, for example. And there was great optimism, and a thing called the GI Bill had been passed so that veterans, and almost all able-bodied men were veterans, could have government benefits to help them get loans to buy houses and to get education, et cetera. And so there was a big boom in births, and that's the so-called baby boom. And that's what was going. So, but what was going on from 1850 to 1930 for that steady decline? What's your guess? Well, okay, very good. Okay, so here, the Civil War, and World War I, about here, and the Great Depression, right? October 1929, right? All there. But that's an awfully steady decline. I'm not seeing any inconsistencies there. What do you think was going on? And no one knows the answer for sure, so you get to guess. Yeah, hold on.
This is working. This is kind of a stretch.
Pardon?
This is kind of a stretch, but
oh, it's kind of a stretch. Sure. There's no wrong answer.
I know during that time, we had some improvements in medicine, especially after the Civil War. So fewer children were dying in childbirth, which I guess would make it, in a way, less necessary to have more kids.
I think that's a good point, right? If this is number of children per woman, right? But in the old days, not all children lived, right? And so if you tried to have a child and it died, you'd try to have another.
I think less people like throughout this time were living like in farms and people were moving to cities. So people needed to have less kids to be like farm hands.
It's absolutely true. In the 20th century, in 1900, the majority of Americans lived on farms, right? And so almost every American was a farmer. And that changed with the growth of cities. There was another hand. Riley, yeah.
So I was thinking maybe it could be because, like, I know in the 1920s there was like a big flapper era, which, like kind of bred a new wave of feminism, which might have caused the women to have less kids.
Less kids, but wouldn't you expect flappers to have more sex?
Yes, so yeah.
Yeah, and yet still less kids. But not to say that that's not an issue at all, because I think that's exactly right.
to the point about like people moving out of farms into cities, there was a lot of reforms about like expanding access to education. So it was no longer for like just the upper elite. So as more people of both genders got more and more educated, they started to pursue other life opportunities and also just might have had like more awareness of like not necessarily like maybe not contraceptive, but like just like, oh, this is what can happen if you have like sex, which might not have been like something that was widely shared before the standardization of that.
And that's absolutely true. Number one, that people were more educated. Also, people were smarter in terms of all sorts of things. I don't know if you know this. If this was my intro psych class, I'd be pointing out, the average IQ of Americans rose like 2 standard deviations in the 20th century. I mean, more information was disseminated in lots of ways, right? Newspapers, then radio, television. I mean, and now the internet, it's a totally different world. So more education, more knowledge, more, and that would help you to do what? To reduce the number of children. How would that reduce the number of children? What is it that you know now that you didn't know then? I mean, because pretty much everybody knew that having sex made babies, but that made it what you're going to talk about.
Here's my hypothesis for why it decreased so much in the 80s. I'm assuming that's the 80s.
I was going to ask that next.
Yeah, you're gonna ask. Okay, then in the 40s, we'll go with like the war. There was a war going on.
Yep, all of that. Oh, you have a. Okay, good.
People were asexual or people found out about STIs.
Yep, those are all good hypotheses, right? More information about STIs. And STIs are kind of one of the things people learned, despite the fact that the US government tried to prevent people from learning about it, were condoms and the rhythm method. And those were just about the only birth control methods available at that time. But the information the condoms have been available since the 1800s, right? They predate this. So we'll talk about those some more. Then the other thing I wanted to ask you, okay, the war's over, and then starting in 1960, there's a sharp decrease. And we've talked about this before. What happened? In 1960, excellent. Yes, Sarah. Birth control pills, the pill. That's what happened. It changed the world. And the continuing decline, now that birth control pills have been widely available to anyone who wants them, why are the number of children going down? So now that we're down to 1.5 children per woman. So that was more publicized. No, yeah, so women have more options and know about it.
It's like before the pill was out there, but people didn't really know about it. Like they weren't educated on their like sex options or contraceptive options.
Yep. So it was more widely known, but also, I mean, do you think it was more widely accepted? More people were willing. I think the Vatican ruled against birth control pills like in the mid-60s. And so at that point, they forbade their members to use the pill, or any contraception for that matter, other than the method. But most American Catholic women ignored that and used contraception anyway. So those are all the things that are going on. And does anyone think it's going to go up again? No, no way. You'll never get that genie back in the bottle. Once women know Number one, that they feel like they have more control over their bodies and their lives once they have the tools to not have to give up sex just because they don't have another baby. It isn't going back. And we talked about this briefly about, oh, that's not the one I want to talk about. And this, why does education cause women to wait until they're older to have kids? Academia is the easy one, right? You're not, if you really think you got to wait until you have tenure, you're going to be in your mid-30s if you're a star. But what outside academia? What are the issues?
Having children like isn't as important. Like it's not the end all be all of their dreams and aspirations.
Number one, having children isn't as important as it used to be. But if you do have them, why have them later?
So you have more money and control.
I mean, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, there's been a huge change, and we're not showing this. This is today, but there's been a huge economic change in my lifetime, okay? Which is, it's hard for a family to make it in America today unless both parents work. And it's not because they buy more toys. I gotta tell you, in the 1970s, even in the 1980s, a person with a working class job could have a stay-at-home spouse, would make enough money to raise their kids, buy a home, pay all their medical bills, because virtually nobody had health insurance in those days. And, you know, that was possible then. Anybody think that's possible now for a blue collar worker to, right? The world has totally changed, and that's absolutely going to have an effect on, can you afford to have children? I mean, once contraception is available. And we'll talk about contraception some more later. Anyone want to have anything else to say? Oh, and just to be a little bit political, the fact that working class people can't raise a family, buy a home on one salary anymore is it's not unrelated to the fact that, you know, the divide in wealth in our nation has never been higher, right? Even before 1929, there wasn't this much concentration of wealth in the hands of a few people versus everybody else. And you can ask yourself how that came to be. Any other questions about trends in births? And I think we talked about this, about how world population is almost certainly going to decline. Even, I mean, because of demographics, not because of some apocalypse or something like that. And I think none of us are concerned about that. But I did mention that governments are concerned about that. So what are the sorts of things? I mean, I won't talk about the sorts of things that governments have done to try to persuade people to have more kids, but tell me what governments could do that might be effective in getting people to have more kids. We mentioned subsidized childcare, right? Which I think is on nobody's political agenda. But I'm not particularly concerned about whether we have more babies in the future, but some people are. But if you do want to have more, if you do want there to be more babies born in the future, what other measures could a government take? Anyone think of something that seems more important to you than, I mean, I want to hear all ideas, but anyone think of something to be more important than subsidized daycare? Right. I mean, it's especially when kids are young, it can sometimes take one of those salaries just to pay for daycare if you have quality daycare.
Giving people money if they have kids, or like some type of benefit if they have a child.
So, you know, like having free food for your children, right? That would go a long way, right? So, you know, why not SNAP benefits for every kid in America, right? That would encourage people to think they could afford a kid and maybe more kids.
Paid maternity and paternity leave.
Paid maternity and paternity leave. Across the border in Canada, it's the law. A woman who has a baby her employer is required to give her a year of paid maternity leave, not 6 weeks, a year, and she has to be paid, and the job has to be waiting for her when she's done. What else could be done?
Universal health care.
Yep. If you really want people to have babies, don't make it so risky for them to go into hospitals, right? I mean, risky as in you may find yourself in debt for the rest of your life. Anyway, other ideas about that? Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about are some of the risks involved in women waiting till they're older to have children. And the most, in general, the older women are when they have children, the more likely there are to be complications, which is not to say, of course, that there aren't plenty of children being born to women who are in their late 30s and 40s. But the chance of complication are higher the older the woman is. On the other hand, healthcare, medical care has gotten really good. And so many of those things can be overcome. One known increase in risk is the risk of Down syndrome, also due to having 3 copies of chromosome 21. By the way, the woman who discovered that was the underlying cause of Down syndrome. I mean, Down syndrome had been known since ancient times. It described, right, the facial characteristics, the short stature, things like that. But the woman who discovered it was due to an extra chromosome, just passed away at 90 something. And you won't be surprised to learn that although she made the discovery, it was a male colleague who presented the research first and didn't mention her. So it's that kind of a world. And the older women are, the more likely that the child they have might have Down syndrome. I don't know if I have a graph, but so here's the example. So here's what the odds are. For 30-year-old women, it's a 1 in 800 chance. For 45 or older, it's 1 out of 25 births, etc. So there are things that can be done. Prenatal screening to see whether there's an extra chromosome, because a karyotype is relatively easy to get and requires only cells from anywhere, just about anywhere in the body. That sort of typing has been available long before the revolution in molecular biology. But of course, screening to see if the baby has Down syndrome doesn't make any sense if, should the parents learn that the child has Down syndrome, they're not going to do anything about it. So we'll talk about abortion next chapter, but the only rationale for screening for Down syndrome that makes any sense is if you would at least consider having an abortion instead of having the child. There are a couple of consequence things there. First of all, there are plenty of people who, even once they know the child has Down syndrome, want to go ahead with the pregnancy anyway. And you can ask yourself, it is true that people with Down syndrome have more medical complications than other people, than control subjects. They are more likely to have heart conditions and things like that. They don't tend to live long lifespans, and there may be intellectual disability associated with it. On the other hand, there are plenty of examples out there of people who, have very mild intellectual disability, live long lives, et cetera. And so it's not, I wouldn't think that anybody would find it an easy choice. The other thing that people who have kids with Down syndrome report is they are remarkably social and affectionate. So, there are other things that come along with that occurrence. It's a, it's a constellation of characteristics. And I have seen people disapprove of women seen in public with a kid with Down syndrome, disapprove of the mother if she looks older, to say she should have known. That was selfish of her to have a kid when she knew she was too old and would likely to have Down syndrome. And there's nothing rational about that judgment whatsoever. Number one, even if she's 45, the odds of a Down syndrome kid are 4%, 1 out of 25. And the other thing, the other idea that I've heard out there is that there wouldn't be any kids with Down syndrome if only women would stop having kids, at such an old age. But that too is totally irrational. Most children with Down syndrome were born to young mothers. Get that? Although being older makes it more likely the child will have Down syndrome, the vast majority of kids with Down syndrome in the United States today were born to younger mothers. And by younger, I mean less than 35. And talk about it here. Why is that? Well, it's because most of the babies born are born to people that are under 35. Okay. This is another instance where you have to be careful about how you apply statistics you learn about groups and try to apply them to an individual, right? Just because older women are more likely to have Down syndrome, you don't know that that particular Down syndrome kid had an older mother. Questions about that? Okay. If you would consider whether to continue with the pregnancy or not with Down syndrome, testing the embryos, there's two major ways it's done. Far and away the most common is amniocentesis, where the clinic inserts a hypodermic needle into the amniotic fluid, withdraws some of the fluid, which will inevitably have some cells from the fetus inside there. Then they spin down the fluid, collect the cells at the bottom, and do a karyotype to look to see how many chromosome 21s are there. As we point out here, the best time to do this is about 15 weeks. Best time for several reasons. Number one, because there should by then there should be plenty of amniotic fluid to safely sample. And number two, if you are considering terminating the pregnancy, the earlier, the better for the sake of the mother and her health. And it is like every medical procedure, it has some risks, but it's pretty low. So about a 0.3% chance that going in for the amniocentesis will cause a problem with the pregnancy and end up in terminating the pregnancy. If in cases where people are particularly concerned about whether or not to terminate the pregnancy with an abortion, and if they're particularly concerned about at which stage of abortion they would be willing to do this, there is a riskier procedure that can be done earlier that requires going through the vagina, through the cervical opening, and getting a small bit of tissue from the amniotic sac around the fetus, and then doing the same thing. Take some of the cells, do a karyotype, and look for the number of chromosome 21s. Questions about that? Good. The one thing we know for sure is harmful to fetuses and increase the likelihood that the pregnancy will be problematic, or that the child might have problems later, are drugs and infections. So the number one is probably alcohol, and we'll talk about that some in a moment. Tobacco is another one that tobacco use of any sort definitely increases the chance that the pregnancy will be lost. Not listed here is caffeine. The data on whether drinking coffee or not makes a difference for pregnancy, it's totally equivocal. I mean, in my lifetime, I've seen the recommendations move back and forth, and it's not a coincidence, and it's not been overlooked that it's not listed here. And I will just say, as an aside, as someone who's an avid caffeine user, I am so glad the drug I like to use doesn't seem to have much in the way of health problems. But there you are. And there are certain acne medications that have a very high risk of having the fetus have a major birth defect, missing limbs, shortened limbs, things like that. So these acne medications all have that. They typically say something about, vitamin A or retinoid, but what they all have in common is they're agents for retinoic acid, which is an important signal for embryonic and fetal development. And they have labeled all over them big signs saying, don't take this if there's any chance you could be pregnant, right? I would get pregnant. So it's a very powerful teratogen that is causing birth defects. And and I would just say that if you're taking the acne medication, that it's a good idea to be on a very reliable birth control method, right? If you're gonna use the medicine, it's a topical medicine that you add on, but the retinoic acid agent gets into circulation easily and is effective at incredibly low doses. So if you are going to use that kind of acne medication, you really want to make sure you're not going to get pregnant. Thalidomide is famous because it was a drug that was given primarily in Europe to women to try to help them avoid losing a pregnancy, and it later was turned out to have very high probability of birth defects, malformations of the body, et cetera. And I think most of the other things we've talked about and the risks are, get kind of be low at that. There are certain diseases that are very likely to have consequences if the mother gets them during the pregnancy. Rubella is perhaps the most famous and one that causes the most damage. But genital herpes, HIV, chlamydia, all those things can result in problems that are listed there. A few years back, there was a big scare. There was something called a Zika virus that was found around the world and caused severe brain malformations, where like half of the brain would be missing, and yet the rest of the child would be relatively viable. And other stuff that are listed. Questions about any of those? The one that we've known about the longest, believe it or not, Aristotle wrote about it, is that women who drink excessively during pregnancy will have children that can have problems. This is known as fetal alcohol syndrome. And this child shows an example of a severe case of the facial malformations that occur, that you can see the short eye slits, a sort of flattened face. You can't really see those lines under the nose, on the upper lip as well, et cetera. None of which would matter, of course, because that's just the appearance, but it's also typically accompanied by behavioral problems and intellectual disability. So the current, and here's another slide about that. The current advice from the CDC is that there's no amount of alcohol that you can be sure will have no adverse effect on a pregnancy. So their recommendation is you go total cold turkey from alcohol when you're pregnant. Oh, and here's in severe cases the brain malformations. So again, you see that sloping face that's flattened, et cetera. And in this particular case, it's just showing out this particular kid with FAS has no corpus callosum. Now, what's interesting about that is that there are rare individuals born without a corpus callosum all the time, and unless it's part of some other dysfunction, some other disorder, you can't tell them apart. So I'm not saying that this means without a corpus callosum they'll be severely disabled, but it does give an indication of how much alcohol can affect the development of the brain. Was it Amy?
So is there any recommendation for men while like women are also trying to get pregnant to not drink alcohol, or is it only like on women?
Yeah, it's a great question. The main effect of drugs on men is on sperm quality, right? So, I mean, to say nothing of how smoking and alcohol also, make it less likely that erection will happen. But there's also evidence that it has effect on the quality of the sperm, and therefore they might have more difficulty getting pregnant. I don't know of any data suggesting that the sperm of men who were drinking or having tobacco at the time the sperm were made, that was affecting the offspring. On the third hand, the one thing we do know is that the older men are when they father a child, the greater the risk of certain disorders, and including schizophrenia. So there is reason to think that the father's age would play a role in the successful outcome of the pregnancy as well. Other questions? Good. I wonder if that's good for the microphone. Maybe I'll stop doing that. Hold on. Yeah, your question.
How like soon after getting pregnant does it matter? Like, what if you've been pregnant for a week, like it's happened, but you don't know yet, and you drink?
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, nobody knows because nobody's gathered the data that way. And certainly, it's certainly not unusual for women to not realize they're pregnant and maybe have a drink or whatever. And so I don't think anyone knows. So I think the recommendation would be, if you know you want to get pregnant, that's a reason not to drink. But if a woman, had some drinks and then later learned she was pregnant, my advice would be to chill out, because if you want the baby, what are you going to do anyway? And let me tell you, in my generation, right, virtually every kid in the baby boom, all those people, virtually every one of them, their mothers were either drinking or smoking or both throughout pregnancy, because nobody knew that was a problem. And I can tell you, my mother, 17 by the time I came out, she was definitely a smoker for years beforehand and most of the rest of her life. So it was, it's not the end of the world, right? But you do what you can when you can. And maybe this is the time to say that, if you're going to make a kid, right, you're making a bargain, right? Which is you're going to do the best you can, right? And that's the only bargain you can make. Don't decide that you're going to be perfect, because you're not gonna, right? You're going to screw up a lot. And as we talk about these birth defects, et cetera, if you do have a kid and happens to have some problems, the contract is you love the kid and take care of him anyway. And if you're not willing to love and take care of the kid, if they do have one of those problems, then you shouldn't be having a kid, because you're breaking the contract. I mean, unless you think somebody else should take care of the kid that you decide to make. So, you have to balance it, right? You do the best you can to keep a problem from arising, but you live with the fact that it's an imperfect world and you're an imperfect person. So, I mean, most parents are imperfect. I'm sure there's some perfect parents out there. I've just never met them. So, okay, so let's have Okay. Another thing that can happen sometimes is it sometimes happens that a woman can ovulate and can get pregnant, but for whatever reasons, and there's several different things that could cause this, but that she can't maintain the pregnancy. And in those cases, another option is to use in vitro fertilization or artificial insemination to, no, sorry about that, go back. Use in vitro fertilization to produce a fertilized egg from the mother, from the father, and then grow it in a test tube long enough to make sure it's going to be viable, and then implant it into another woman with into her system. And for this to happen, typically the surrogate mother will be plied with drugs to make her um, more hospitable to an embryo. And typically, when this is done, the mother is paid. There are plenty of cases where the surrogate mother is a volunteer, where it's someone in the family who wants a relative to get to have a child. In general, when you look for a surrogate mother, you're looking for someone who's successfully carried a pregnancy before, because that's a good indication that they could do that again. And um, and you know, the idea typically is that the family that wants the baby will pay for the medical care and delivery and things like that. In some cases, the surrogate may be paid as much as $90,000 to $130,000. And as far as I know, in the United States, there are no laws, no regulations that are regulating this. So our Congress has totally ignored the fact that this can happen. And for me, at least, there's an ethical problem of paying someone else to carry your baby if it's just for money, right? So growing up in the Vietnam era, where the draft was hanging over everyone, I was surprised to learn that during the Civil War, if your draft number came up, you could pay to send somebody else to go fight for you. How many people think that that's an ethical practice? Anyone think it's not ethical to pay someone else to go fight for you? I agree with you. How is that different than paying someone to take your health risk, carrying your baby for you? Yeah, Abner.
Were they, if you would go out and be like, hey, I have $300, would you go to war for me? Or were they paying the government $300 so that they could skip the?
They were, a good point, they were paying the government.
Oh, yeah. But
Right.
but this is different. This is, you go out and you're like, hey, I have $90,000 on the side. Would you like to carry my child for me? And somebody says, hey, I think this is worth the risk and I'll take it.
So you feel okay about it?
I don't see why it's unethical. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not gonna pass a
That's a
judgment
good
right
answer.
away.
Yeah.
But it's different than the $300 in my opinion.
Okay, good point. Okay, we're gonna get to everybody. Okay. And you can go ahead and offer your opinion, even if it's somebody else has said it.
I would think that like there's definitely like a fine line between it being ethical and unethical because I just think that like it's like exploitative to like in our current like capitalist society, like there's so many people who like are who cannot pay their are not paid a living wage and cannot survive. And this is I just feel like it's exploitative that someone can be like, I don't feel like taking care of or feel like having my baby on my own and they have no like medical reason to have a surrogate. And then this person is desperate for money. So maybe they're taking like a risk they wouldn't usually take. Like, like, and I'm just also like, women selling their bodies is never really my thing either.
And that's an interesting point. And just to push you, so if everybody got free food and free housing and free medical care, would you feel less worried about the ethical issues? Okay, but the health risk would still be there. Yeah. Yeah.
I want to know your thoughts or your take on surrogate mothers when they're used by a homosexual male couple when they can't have a kid that way.
I mean, to me, the question isn't any different. Doesn't, I don't see what difference that makes. If she's a friend and is volunteering to do it because she wants to help them, who could interfere with that or argue with that? See,
I saw like a TikTok a while ago about this woman that was like paying a surrogate to have her kid, but she treated the surrogate really poorly and it was like really exploitative. So I would say like situations like that, but like also you can't like control who like is paying you. Like you have no idea like the situation that you're getting into cuz also the surrogate had complications like during her pregnancy as well. So I'm like I don't know, I think it's like a really big risk and like I don't know what reward would be good enough.
so I mean, excellent point. Was there another hand here? Because I know there are a couple. Let me get up there because I know you guys had it earlier. Okay, so and there are plenty of legalities that are. I mean, of course, in these cases, there's a contract signed by everyone involved. But I mean, what if after the surrogate mother has the baby, she looks at it and says, "I want this baby. I grew it. None of my genes, but it's my kid." Or what if during delivery she dies? Where was first hands? Oh, well, yeah, we'll get there since I'm up here. Sarah, right? Yeah, okay.
So I have two things. Do you know who Paris Hilton is?
Pardon?
Paris Hilton.
I know who that is.
So she's had two children via surrogacy,
Oh.
just for funsies. And her mom didn't even know she was having a baby. Like she literally surprised her. So that was insane. Second,
I don't care if it's insane. Was it
was
ethical in your opinion?
So I don't think it's ethical. I agree with the point that was made over there about selling your body. I feel like that's kind of not correct. I just read an article in the New York Times though. This woman was like 65. She had frozen embryos that were inseminated and then she impregnated them in a surrogate and she forged her husband's signature. The hospital refused to give her the babies. So they're like there's a lawsuit against her. I just read it and I should do more research on it, but
No, I can imagine exactly those sorts of I mean, it's such a complicated situation. So, and um, and through it all, it's like, who's talking for the kid?
In a different class that I had, we watched a movie about surrogacy, and in it, one of the women was talking about like she went through this whole process, and at the very end, the people who were paying for her to have this baby just said, "Actually, we don't want it." Well, because the child ended up having complications, and so they were like, "Well, we want you to get an abortion because we don't want this baby because this baby has medical complications." And she's like, "No, I don't believe in abortion, so I'm not going to get one." And so like, "Well, then it's your baby now." And she's like, "Well, I can't take care of another baby because this was supposed to be yours." So I do believe that there can be ethical complications in that of just being like, what happens when one or both, like one of the parties decides they don't want the baby, but the other one doesn't want to, take on that responsibility.
Yeah. So yeah, what a nightmare. So here's a kid with special needs. It's going to need a lot of care, and the only person that wants it is the one who has no resources, because she was the one that needed the money badly enough that she would do. Oh, I'm sorry.
To kind of go with like the thread of like selling your body, like I think that it really your stance on this depends on how you feel about prostitution. And like if you're against prostitution, then I think you need to be against surrogacy for use of like selling your body for necessity purpose. But if you aren't against prostitution, then I don't think you have a place to be against this either. So there's like a weird, that's the moral hinge, I guess.
Well, I hold on to. I love that you brought that up. So, are the health risks for having sex as great as the health risk for having a baby?
I mean, that really depends because it
Are-
depends on how
are-
safe you're being. It depends on whether STDs are involved. It depends on whether you get pregnant from being a prostitute. And I think at the end of the day, everyone has the choice to do what they want to do with their own bodies. But also, I do think it's a weird moral gray area where you're now paying people to have your children and they're doing it because they're broke and don't have any other choice. And that's what they can do. And that's where it's like, I don't know if I like that. It's giving Handmaid's Tale, but
It's a sort of situation where you wonder whether governments should be looking at and paying attention to and regulating this, right? Except, our government's AWOL on this. Yeah.
I would agree with the last person who spoke, that if you're talking about people selling their bodies for money, it's really no different than, people who are poor signing up for the military. I mean, usually that is men, but my dad personally couldn't afford to take on college debt himself, so he went into the military for 20 years. They paid for his college, but it wasn't free. And it's affected his body. Like, he did sell his body because his body is now constantly in pain from that experience.
Right. And, but of course, people who go into hard physical labor or dangerous positions, dangerous jobs, they are selling their body. And okay, so a sex worker who charges someone $100 to have sex with her with a condom is that different than a woman who decides she wants to marry that guy because he's got so much money? I want you to be uncomfortable, but you want to talk about surrogacy, I think, or maybe surrogacy and versus sex work.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring up another example of what we're talking about. A lot of people will go into, like, they'll be offered money to go into medical trials for like drugs that might have unknown risks. And there are like laws like, oh, you can opt out at any time, or but at the end of the day, they're still selling their body for money to, go through some risks. And it's no different to like surrogacy.
Or drug trials in prisons where the prisoners might think that participating might increase their chance of parole. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that like all of that is exploitative, like in my opinion. But I wanted to bring up this one case that I heard about this woman who was suing her surrogate because the baby ended up dying, and she was blaming the surrogate for that. And the mother was like, it was a genetic or the surrogate mother was like, the doctor said it was a genetic complication, and so she was like, how could it be my fault? So even situations like that, like, I just think it's too messy, and it's just, and like they were talking about how there's laws with like the drug trials. There are no really laws around surrogacy. So like, maybe if it was heavily regulated, I could get behind it, but like where it is now, no.
There was someone still here? No. We'll go up there. Hold on. Sorry. Did you still have it? Oh, okay. Yeah.
I want to play devil's advocate.
Good.
And I think it's important to think about a mother who is struggling to get pregnant because of complications and the mental struggle of that and wanting to have that baby so bad. But at the same time, that brings up adoption, and adoption could also be an option. That is all.
Yep. Yep. I get that. And of course, if the mother is struggling and she can persuade someone in her family or a friend to volunteer. I mean, and there are women who enjoy being pregnant. I mean, who will tell you that. They feel good about it. They feel good while they're pregnant. No, not everyone has morning sickness, but did you still have? Okay, and then Elliot.
I had something similar. I feel like if you are like a gay couple or something, I feel like that's kind of different. But if you are two straight people who can have a baby and everything, and you just want a surrogate just because you don't want to carry it, I feel like that makes a little bit of a difference. Because like you're just paying for a uterus, kind of. when you have a functioning one that could do it yourself?
So for you, the big difference is it because the woman can't carry the pregnancy, or is it versus she doesn't want to carry the pregnancy, a la apparently Paris Hilton? Or is that
I don't
the
know, but my opinion is stronger if she can, but just doesn't want to.
okay? Yes, I get that. Hold it here and then there.
I think that there should be regulations, but honestly, like the reason for having a surrogate, I don't think really matters as long as the regulations are on that contract. Like death and any type of like problem should be in that contract. And if both parties are okay with that, then that's the part that should be regulated. Whether you like just can or can't carry a baby, it shouldn't really, it's all about like obviously their body, their choice. So if you want the money and you just I don't know. I feel like it should just be on the contract.
Yeah, and there might be some people for which $120,000 could make a big difference in their lives, right? Yeah.
Just gonna say, I don't see how it's any different from paying someone to do like a risky job for you. You know what I mean?
To do
Like a risky job
a
for you.
risky job.
Like, I mean, like that's kind of like because now we're getting towards like that's kind of how like this economy runs. Like you pay someone to do something you either don't have the skills to do or you don't want to do. And so yeah, I don't see how there's anything wrong with paying someone to do that.
Okay, that's. Is there another? Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, and then we better wrap it up. But yeah, so we can get to another Kahoot.
Just two quick things. I've always disliked the notion that adoption is an equal alternative to surrogacy and things like that. I think that having a child for anyone is an inherently like kind of a selfish thing. You want to have a child because you want your genes to pass on, you want your bloodline to continue. So I think the argument that our adoption is like kind of the same for same-sex couples or same-sex male couples and women who can't have children is it's not an equivalent thing. And also, I think there is legislation that I think legislation is going to catch up with surrogacy. There is something passed in Michigan within the past like year or two by the governor where like surrogate mothers can no longer renege and like claim that the child is theirs. The parents who paid them have like a legal right to the child. So I do think that legislation is going to catch up with surrogacy like pretty soon.
And I agree that legislation will catch up. What's interesting about that piece of legislation is of the two parties involved, which one is being protected and which one tends to have more money than the other. Right? They're making sure the surrogate can't say, I'm going to keep the kid. They're taking care of the folks with money. Still, any regulation better than none, right? I would say. So, okay. So enough about that, I guess. More to think about. Here's another ethical issue to deal with. It is an open secret in many countries in Asia, especially where the culture especially prizes sons over daughters, that selective abortions are being done, where screening is done first to decide whether it's a boy or a girl. And if they know that it's a girl, they're much more likely to have an abortion than if it's a boy. And so here are some of the situations. So I've told you, in general, in human populations, the sex ratio is this. There are more boys born than girls, but it's a tiny difference. It's like 105 boys to every 100 girls, okay? This comes out to be about 51%. And look at what's happening in some countries these days where, I guess this is just about the preferences. And so there are cultural differences. What I always thought was interesting about this is in Spain, people would prefer to have girls, right? You're good. And in Iceland, right? I don't have any explanation for that except that cultures vary. Plenty of cultures where it's basically the same. But people have done the math, and in China, there's for some time now, the ratio has been 135 boys for every 100 girls. And there's no way for that to happen naturally, right? There's no way to bias the sex ratio of the kid you're going to have except selective abortion. And in India, the estimate is that because, and I think officially in India, it's illegal to abort a pregnancy because of the sex of the child, and yet it's done totally in the open, and it's never prosecuted. And estimates are there are about 10 million missing female embryos since 2006. And Qatar, although I never know how to pronounce it, the ratio has been 300 boys to 100 girls. And so when we talk about abortion next time, this is an issue that we'll talk about. What's being shown here in the graph are preferences, but the text is talking about, yes, there's no other explanation.
Because I think it's very highly restricted abortion.
Yeah, you'd
So
think it.
I
Yeah.
looked it up, and I think it's because of migration.
These are the births. You go to the hospitals and keep track of how many boys and girls got born.
I don't know. I questioned that.
Okay, well, yeah. I mean, maybe the data are, yeah.
I was gonna say, like in India, the culture is very like kind of against abortion, but despite that, people still even like kind of like here when laws have like a huge crackdown on abortion, people still find a way to do it because it's like a truth of life kind of.
And it's one of the problems that's going to lead to population problems in both China and in India, which is there's a lot of men who aren't going to find a wife because there are too many males and not enough females in their generations. Yeah.
Are the stats in China, are these from during the one-child policy or after?
I'm sorry.
Are the stats from before the one-child policy or from during it or after?
Probably they overlap. I mean, I don't remember which cohort. I mean, and the other way you can keep track of this is just do your population census, right? So of people who are this age, 40 to 50, or maybe 30 to 40, how many are males and how many are females? And you know that there were 101 males born per 100 females. And yes, males are more likely to die, but which is why the population of adults ends up being about 100 to 100. But there's no way to explain these stats.
I feel like, but my thing is like,
Well, your point is if you're only going to have one child.
Yeah, it's harder for me to blame the parents in a society where it is better to have a boy to do this when the government is controlling how many kids they can have.
Right.
I mean,
right.
as a person who is directly affected by that, like,
yeah.
I personally don't blame my parents for giving me up because like they were being forced, their hand was forced.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's
Yeah. So your point is if you can only have one kid, that maybe, and if there's so many ways to unpack that. So number one, to have a kid and have it, born in a society where it's going to be discriminated against, right? That's a concern. Yeah. So, but, does that mean back when, even today, when homophobia is far from gone, but especially go back a few years, I mean, would it have been ethical then to screen your embryos for IVF to look for genes for homosexuality? And to say, no, I want that embryo, not that one. Because I don't think that's as likely to be gay. Would it be okay to select the embryo for eye color? Well, we really like a blue-eyed baby. Did you have a comment or, yeah, you looked like you did. I mean, about any of those topics. I've totally let this get out of hand, but what?
For eye color, I just feel like that's dumb. Like, it doesn't
Pardon?
matter. Like, I just think eye color is dumb. Like, why do you care?
Well, yeah, I didn't say it was dumb, but okay. And selecting for color blindness, are you okay with that? Okay, okay. Okay, no, I think plenty. Let's see, since, yeah, okay.
I mean, when you're doing IVF though, aren't you like you get to pick the embryos they implant, so and you know the genders most of the time, so people are picking the genders. So I mean, what's like
And is that unethical to choose the genders in IVF in your opinion?
I don't know. I don't know about the
Good
ethics,
answer.
but my thought process is like I don't know the ethics about choosing for like eye color and stuff, but I just would like to bring up the point that you're choosing for like I guess seemingly larger things. So
And I think everyone agrees screening for something like Tay-Sachs or Huntington's, something like that. I don't know. Here, Nick, hand that back.
I would say that like when you start getting into the realm of like what can I pick to choose about my child before they're born, I fear we like get into the eugenics of it all. Like it's like a very slippery slope in my opinion. Like, oh, if I can pick their eye color, let me try and pick the IQ, let me try and pick all these different things. And I can make the best baby possible when it's like you should just love your kid no matter how they come up.
Okay, but is it eugenics if you're a carrier for Huntington's and you select for only embryos that aren't carrying the diseased allele?
I think it's a gray area. I would verge on the answer of no. Like when it comes to like debilitating diseases that would cause like a negative quality of life, I would say like it's really up to the mother. Like I can't be your ethics for that. But I would say like when it comes to things that aren't life or death, like there is no reason you should be choosing that for your child. You should love them no matter what.
Thank you. Okay. You still got it. We'll get there. We will cover the material. But
Basically just adding on to that, I don't think that it's like build a baby. Like
you don't think it's
I don't think it's like a build a baby workshop where I want a blue-eyed baby with like the smartest IQ and doesn't have any life-threatening diseases. Like I think like picking against life-threatening diseases would be okay. I'll be the ethical police. I think sure, do it. But anything else, I think no.
okay. You're saying it's complicated. and I agree with that. Two more, and then we'll so here and there. So hold on. So I mean, it's not hard, right, to make the question, change the question a little bit and make you squirm, right? This is good. This means you're a good human being. It's good to squirm, is what I'm saying.
I know there has already been stories of kids that have been like, I think it was like the designer babies. So parents have paid a lot of money to
That's the
genetically.
idea.
And the issue is like you are already creating this perfect idea of the child you want. And because of like how humans are created, like you expect them, there's a preconceived idea of like this is how the child will turn out. And the moment that kid, and they kind of like forget that the child is its own person, and they will never be like exactly how they want it. The moment that kid shows any sign or like is there any mutation that has not been that has not been noticed, that child will not be loved, most likely.
Okay. Last one. Oh my. Yeah.
So I kind of agree with what was said about eugenics. If we choose to basically not choose, let's say, for instance, dwarfism, if we select against dwarfism, ultimately eradicating this trait, that's eugenics right there. Or Tay-Sachs, or Huntington's
deafness.
disease, or deafness. So we're kind of removing diversity from our culture, which is ultimately
eugenics. Like it's clearly, picking the type of traits we want to see within our society. But then we're also saying these traits are wrong, Like for sure, Tay-Sachs is totally awful. Like you don't want anyone to have that. And that could be like a form of positive eugenics. We're positively altering our future. Sorry, I took a eugenics class, so like that's like a term I heard. And then obviously something negative would be like
Sure. No. I mean, positive eugenics versus negative eugenics.
Right.
It opens up all sorts of questions.
Yes, like it's definitely like I see why it's so important to like choose against Tay-Sachs, but also it opens up a book of like what are good traits, what are bad traits, and now we're saying like deafness is a bad trait, color blindness is a bad trait, being having dwarfism is a bad trait, but these are things that make us unique. So that really kind of causes a lot of chaos in society. So I don't really agree with it.
And okay, and obviously you've thought about this a lot. In terms of eugenics and deafness, this is a neuroscience class. You know what cochlear implants are? And so you know that there's some controversy about whether they should be allowed, whether cochlear implants should be given to children so that they won't learn American Sign Language and won't be part of that culture, and that culture will die out. We don't have time to discuss it. It's not quite this class, but it's, so if you, yeah. So once you start making these selections, I just want you to see that it gets complicated quickly, right? Aiden, did you have something you wanted to say? Well, you're wondering why what? Why some people are opposed to cochlear implant? Well, the deaf community, I mean, there's been some concern. I mean, they have a culture of their own, a language of their own, right? And if medical interventions mean that no more deaf children are produced, well, and by the way, so it turns out there's like more than 100 different genes that could have mutations that will lead to deafness. So it turns out there's a lot of genes you got to have to have a functioning hearing system, and most of them are recessive traits where you have to get two diseased copies of the allele to have the deafness. And so most deaf people, deaf couples who marry, in general, the odds are two people that are deaf have different, even if it's genetic, have different mutations, and therefore their children all can hear, right? So their children grow up bilingual. In my family, I had I had great uncle and a great aunt who were deaf and married deaf people, and all the children could hear, and they were beautifully bilingual, all that stuff, et cetera. So my point is that deaf parents can't teach their kids, well, they do teach their kids American Sign Language, but those kids are also hearing, right? They also speak. So, okay. Having opened the can of worms and now reached the point where I don't have time to go over the next slide, last chance. Other people that had something you wanted to say. Have you? Okay. Hold on.
I think with any of this kind of stuff, I feel like it's all or nothing. Either you have to allow everything or you can't allow any of it. Because if you say, okay, we won't allow diseases, then what about like people with minor forms of autism where they don't really have much problems, or like minor intellectual disabilities? And then once you get to the point of, I mean, it's only a minor intellectual disability. So what if we just raise their IQ? It can't hurt or make them more attractive. So I think it should be all or nothing. I can't really see how you can argue just for I see how you can argue for like individual things, but I feel like it's easily a slippery slope if you don't have that view.
And that strikes me as totally defensible. But I'll just keep pushing you. Okay, eye color, okay to choose for height. It's okay to choose for height of your sons, since you know you're in a society where taller men have more advantages than shorter men. I said, no, I'm not going to let you talk. I'm just more things for you to think about.